In this video, I'm going to cover lesson 13. But before I do that, I want to go back and just review a tiny bit of lesson 12, where we started looking at this concept called completing the square, so that when we go to lesson 13, we can remember the basics here. So looking at 12.3 here, remember it gave us some examples, a couple examples of how to solve this equation here by completing the square. Now they're both solving the same thing, but they had slightly different methods of doing so. So let's go through the two different methods. So Diego decided to subtract 9 from both sides to just get rid of that 9 on the left and just put it on the right side as a negative 9. And then he just figured out, remember we can just think about what's half of this number here and then square it, and we should have that number on the right here. So half of 10 is 5, so 5 squared is 25, so that's what we need to complete the square. So then we also have to add 25 to this side. So then we have 16 on this side total, and then remember this x squared plus 10x plus 25 can be written as x plus 5 squared. And then we have equals 16, so then we can just square root both sides. And remember, the square root of 16 can be positive or negative 4, so we can split it into x plus 5 equals 4, or x plus 5 equals negative 4. And then we get x equals negative 1, or x equals negative 9. This method was slightly different. So Mai kept the 9 on the left. She didn't move it, but then she added on 16 to the left side. So she knew that half of 10 is 5, so then to complete the square, we have to have a plus 25. So Mai was thinking, well, if I have 9 here, I need 16 more to get to 25. And you can see that we end up with 25 here. So instead of moving the 9, he just left the 9 and then only added on what else we needed with the 9 to get to 25. So both of those ways work. Notice she still got the same answers as Diego did. So whichever way you think feels better, just go with that method. So let's just review maybe this one here. X squared plus 12x equals 13. So if we are following Diego's way, Diego basically just got the constant on the right side. So if we're looking at this one, the constant is already on the right side. There's no constant on the left. So then we just have to go look at what he did next. He added what we need to complete the square on the left. So we need to look at what's half of 12. Half of 12 is 6, and 6 squared is 36. So that means that to complete the square, I need to add 36. And then I need to add that on the other side as well. Don't forget that. So then x squared plus 12x plus 36 equals, let's see, that's 49. And then, let's see. Now I can write this as x plus 6 squared. Because when I figured out that half of 12 is 6, I knew that I needed a 6 here. Okay, and then equals 49. So now we can solve this by square rooting both sides. So then we have x plus 6 equals 7, or x plus 6 equals negative 7, because negative 7 squared is also 49. So then we have x equals 1, or x equals negative, 13. Okay, so let's go on to lesson 13, where we're still looking at completing the square, but maybe problems that are a little bit harder. So for our warm-up, it says solve each equation mentally. So you can pause here if you want to and try to solve these equations mentally. I'll go through what we should get. So if x plus x is 1/4, then I know that x should be half. Basically, I know that 2x is 1/4. So then x should be half of 1/4, which is 1/8. Let's see. 3/2 squared equals x. 3/2 squared is going to be, if you're squaring a fraction, you just square the top and square the bottom. Because 3/2 squared is just 3/2 times 3/2. And when you multiply a fraction, you just multiply across the top and across the bottom. So you get 9/4. 3/5 plus x equals 9/5. So let's see. Well, if 3/5 plus x is 9/5, then I need x to be 6/5. Because I still need to be over 5, and then my numerators, my 3 needs to add with something to get 9, so it has to be 6. And then 1/12 plus x equals 1/4. Well, let's think about it this way. 1/12 plus x, 1/4 is how many 12s? 3 12s. So then x would be 2 12s, which is 1/6. Okay, so let's look at solving some harder equations. So it says solve these equations by completing the square. So first we have x minus 3 times x plus 1 equals 5. Well, the first thing that's wrong with this is, well, not wrong, but the first thing that we need to do is, if you look back at the other examples we were doing, on these ones, we were starting with standard form. We weren't in factored form. So what we first need to do is put this into standard form, because we can't really do anything with it in factored form. So let's FOIL this out. So it's going to give us x squared plus x minus 3x minus 3 equals 5. So if I combine my like terms, I get x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 5. Okay, so now we're in standard form at least. We're not in factored form anymore. Let's follow Diego's method where he just moved this constant to the right. So let's add 3 on both sides. I'm going to move this to the right here. So x squared minus 2x equals 8. And then this is where we need to look at this number and take half of it. So negative 2 divided by 2 is going to be negative 1. And then negative 1 squared is 1. So I know I need to add 1. So I need to do x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals, and then add 1 on the other side too, so equals 9. And then now I know that this is equal to x minus 1 squared, because when I figured out what's half of this number, that's what this number should be. And then that equals 9, so just square root both sides. So we end up with x minus 1 equals 3, or x minus 1 equals negative 3. So then you get x equals 4, and x equals negative 2. Okay, let's look at number 2. If we're following Diego's method, we're getting the constant on the right side, so we don't have a constant on the left side, then we're good to start. We already have no constant on the left. So we want to look at what's half of this number. And that's going to be 1/4. So now I know that when I complete the square, it should be x plus 1/4 squared. So then 1/4 squared is going to be 1/16. So I need to add I need to add 1/16 to both sides. So if I add 1/16 to 3/16, I get 4/16. Okay, and then now I know that this is the same as x minus 1, plus 1/4 squared, and that equals 4/16. And then I can square root both sides. And to square root a fraction, you can just square root the top and square root the bottom. So x plus 1/4 equals 2/4. Or x plus 1/4 equals negative 2/4. And I could simplify these to 1/2, but I'm going to leave them so that it has a common denominator with this other 1/4, so that we can deal with like this 1/4, and it can combine with the 2/4. So I can subtract the 1/4 from both sides, and I'll get x equals 1/4, because 2/4 minus 1/4 is 1/4. And then if I do the same thing over here, subtract 1/4 from both sides, I get x equals negative 3/4, because negative 2/4 minus 1/4 is negative 3/4. Okay. Last one. So x squared plus 3x plus 8/4 equals 0. Well, I'm looking at this 8/4, and I know that that's just 2. So there's no reason that we need to write it as a fraction. So I'm going to change that to just 2. And then if I want to do it the way Diego was doing it, where we move the constant over so that we don't have a constant on the left, we can subtract 2 from both sides. So x squared plus 3x equals negative 2. Then I want to figure out what's half of 3, and that's going to be half of 3 is 1.5. So now I'm realizing why they had 8/4 here, but let's just keep going and then we'll deal with that when we get to it. So half of 3 is 1.5. I'm just going to write it as 3/2 actually. So we need to take 3/2 squared to figure out what we need to add. So 3/2 squared is 9/4. So now I see why they had 8/4. It was kind of to help us when we have this 9/4. So let's see, we want to add this 9/4. And we also want to add it on the right side. So I'm gonna make this negative 8/4 again. And then we want to add 9/4. Okay, so that gives us, on the right side, that'll give us 1/4. Okay, and now we know that this on the left is the same as x plus 3/2 squared, and then that equals 1/4. Then we can just square root both sides. So we have x plus 3/2 equals 1/2. Square root of 1/4 is just square root of 1 over the square root of 4. So 1/2, and then also we can have negative 1/2 as well. So x plus 3/2 equals negative 1/2. And then we just subtract 3/2 from both sides, and we get, on this side, we're going to get negative 1. And on this side, we're going to get negative 2. All right. All right, let's go ahead and look at, let's skip ahead to 13.3. There's a few more under 13.2 that you could try if you want to, but I'm going to skip ahead to 13.3 here. So it's called Spot These Errors. So here are 4 equations followed by worked solutions of the equations. Each solution has at least 1 error. So they want us to find the errors. So let's look at these. Here's the first this is the first equation that someone's solving, and we gotta find the errors. So let's see. We're starting with x squared plus 14x minus 24. Then let's see. They added 28 to both sides. Let's make sure that's right. So if you take half of 14, that gives you 7. So then what we add should be 7 squared. And that's 49. So adding that 28 was not right. So they're trying to get x plus 7 squared, but x plus 7 squared should be x squared plus 14x plus 49, not plus 28. So it should be 49 here, and then it should be 25 here. So this should be 25. So then this should be, once you square root both sides, this should be 5 and negative 5. So then they should have gotten, let's see, negative 2 and negative 12. Okay, let's look at the next one. If you want to pause and try to figure out what they did wrong before I tell you, you can go ahead and do that. I'll just keep talking. So you can pause the video if you want to, and then continue the video. So we have x squared minus 10x plus 16 equals 0. Let's see. So it looks like they added 9 to both sides to get 25 here and 9 over here. So let's see if that's right. So if we take negative 10 divided by 2, that's going to be negative 5. Negative 5 squared is 25. So this worked. They do want to get a plus 25. They chose not to move the 16 over, and that's fine. They just need to add on whatever they need to get to 25. So they added 9 to both sides to get that plus 25. And then they added 9 over here too. And then they have x minus 5 squared equals 9, so it looks good so far. Let's see. We square root both sides. Oh, here we go. It was taking me a second to figure out what was wrong here. So when we square root both sides, you get x minus 5 equals not 9. You need to square root 9. So you get x minus 5 equals 3. Or x minus 5 equals negative 3. So then they should have gotten, if you add 5 to both sides, you should get 8. And add 5 to both sides, 2. Okay, let's look at number 3. Again, if you want to pause it and try to figure it out before I tell you, go ahead and pause it, and then you can continue the video once you are ready to hear what is actually wrong with it. So let's see. We have x squared plus 2.4x equals negative 0.8. So we want to figure out what's half of 2.4 and then square that. So 2.4 over 2 is going to be 1.2. And then 1.2 squared, I gotta double check with my calculator what that is. They're saying it should be 1.44, so let's just make sure. Okay, it is 1.44. So they added 1.44 to both sides. Let's make sure they added it right here. So I'm going to just calculate negative 0.8 plus 1.44. And that did give me 0.64. Okay, so we're good so far. So then we have x plus 1.2 squared. That's just the same thing as this. We just wrote it as x plus 1.2 squared. It's basically factoring this. Equals 0.64. Okay, so then they square rooted both sides. And they forgot that when you square root something, so in this example, we're square rooting 0.64, and they say that the square root of 0.64 is 0.8, but they're forgetting that it can also be negative 0.8. So they're forgetting this other part where you could also have x plus 1.2 equals negative 0.8, and then subtract 1.2 from both sides, and you'll get x equals negative 2. So this part was not necessarily wrong, they just forgot this other part, where you also need to remember that it can be negative 0.8 and not just positive 0.8. Okay, let's work through this last one. And again, you can pause if you want to try to figure it out yourself. Okay, so let's figure out what's half of negative 3 or negative 6/5. That's going to be negative 3/5. Basically, you can just take the top and divide it by 2. So negative 6/5 divided by 2 is going to be negative 3/5. Negative 3/5 squared is going to be 9 over 25. Okay, so let's see. What did they do wrong here? So they didn't move the 1/5 over. They didn't subtract the 1/5 from both sides, and that's okay. But what they didn't account for was when they're trying to complete the square here, all they added here was, Let me think. Remember x squared plus 6/5 x. 1/5 is 5/25. Just trying to get a common denominator here. So basically we took 5/25, and all we needed to do was add, all we added here was 4/25. So we added 4/25 over here, but we added 9/25 over here. So we're not adding the same thing on both sides. So really this should just be 4/25, because all we added was 4/25 on this side. And then that's going to completely change our answers. So then when you square root both sides, this is going to end up being -2/5 and 2/5 instead of 3/5 and -3/5. So then our answers are going to change. So we're going to get x equals, if we add 3/5 to both sides, that's going to end up being 5/5 on the right, so that's 1. And then add 3/5 to both sides here, we'll get 1/5.